My family forged my father's will and left me a box of old junk. I stood next to my father's casket on a Tuesday morning that felt wrong in every possible way. The funeral home smelled like those cheap potpourri things they sell at dollar stores, trying to mask something nobody wants to think about. Dad would have hated this place. He was an old-school IT engineer, the kind who built his first computer from spare parts in 1987, and never stopped believing that clean code was more beautiful than any Shakespeare sonnet. He wore the same 3 plaid shirts his entire life, owned exactly 2 pairs of jeans, and thought spending more than $40 on dinner was clinically insane. We got each other. We were the weird ones in a family that worship appearances. While everyone else argued about stock portfolios at Thanksgiving, Dad and I would disappear into his office to argue about whether the Library of Alexandria actually burned or just slowly fell apart from neglect. He was the only person who ever understood why I became a history teacher, instead of doing something that actually made money. He never asked when I was going to get a real job, never made me feel like choosing to educate kids was somehow less valuable than whatever Chad did with spreadsheets and conference calls. I looked across the casket at my brother Chad, 45 years old, personal trainer body, teeth so white they probably glowed in the dark, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He was not crying. He was networking. I watched him work the room like he was at some corporate mixer, shaking hands with Dad's old business contacts, his face carefully arranged into exactly the right amount of grief, just enough to look human, not enough to mess up his makeup. I genuinely expected him to start handing out business cards that said Chad, mergers, acquisitions, and mourning. The guy treated our father's funeral like a LinkedIn event. Then there was Mom. She stood near the flowers, complaining loudly to Aunt Linda about how expensive the funeral arrangements were. She kept saying Dad would not have wanted such extravagance, all while adjusting a pearl necklace that cost more than I made in a year teaching American history to teenagers who thought the Civil War happened in the 1920s. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Dad drove a 15-year-old Camry with a broken air conditioner because he said cars were just metal boxes that move you from point A to point B. Mom drove a Mercedes she replaced every 2 years because apparently her metal box needed to make a statement. They had been married for 47 years, and I still have no idea how they stood each other. I felt like I was watching a play where I was the only person who forgot his lines. Or maybe I was the only one who realized we were supposed to actually be grieving instead of performing grief for an audience. The funeral ended. People filed past, offering those hollow condolences that people give when they do not actually care, but social convention demands they pretend. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man. He's in a better place now. I nodded and thanked him like a robot. My brain was somewhere else, remembering how Dad used to take me to the library every Saturday when I was 8. While other kids played baseball, we hunted for old books about ancient Rome. He never made me feel weird about it. He just got it. Those Saturdays were the foundation of who I became. And now they were just memories gathering dust in a brain that felt too full and too empty at the same time. 3 days later, we gathered in a lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The place screamed money in that quiet, intimidating way that rich people's offices always do. Dark wood paneling. Leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. Everything smelled like expensive cologne and old paper, mixed with that specific scent of places where important people made important decisions that affected unimportant people like me. The lawyer was new, someone I had never met before. Dad had used the same lawyer for 25 years, a straightforward guy named Jerry who wore cheap suits and drove a Buick. This was not Jerry. This was a slick operator in a suit that probably had a name I could not pronounce. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too deep in grief-brain to notice. He sat behind a massive desk that looked like it belonged in a castle, adjusted his designer glasses, and started reading. Chad got to state a gorgeous $5 million house in a neighborhood where the lawns looked like putting greens, and the neighbors definitely had opinions about your trash cans. He got the investment portfolio, stocks and bonds, and all that wealth-building stuff I never understood. He even got Dad's Lexus, a car Dad bought used in 2010, and drove, maybe twice a year, to client meetings. The car still had that new car smell, because Dad treated it like a museum piece. Chad nodded at each item like he was reviewing a quarterly earnings report. No surprise, no emotion, just calm acceptance of what he clearly believed was his birthright. I watched him sit there in his $1,000 suit, looking like every guy who ever called himself a financial advisor on LinkedIn, and I felt something cold forming in my chest. Something that would take me a while to identify as pure, crystallized rage. The lawyer cleared his throat and looked at me. He actually looked uncomfortable, which should have been my second red flag. He said the next part carefully, like he was defusing a bomb with words. And to Mark, my client leave the contents of his home office desk. The room went silent, not the respectful silence of a church or a library, the uncomfortable silence of people trying not to laugh. I could feel it building like pressure before a storm. Chad made this sound. It was not a laugh exactly, more like a snort, the kind of noise someone makes when they think something is beneath them, like when you see someone driving a beat-up car and you feel superior about your lease payment. That exact sound. Mom rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might actually fall out of her head. She said something about how at least Dad left me something, and how he always knew who could be trusted with real responsibility. Her voice dripped with enough condescension to fill a swimming pool. The subtext was clear. I was not capable of handling real money. I was a family charity case getting his participation trophy. The lawyer silently pushed a cardboard box across his massive desk toward me. Standard office supply store box. Corners slightly crushed. Strips of old packing tape still stuck to the sides. Inside was a collection of items that looked like they came from a garage sale nobody wanted to attend. There was a tangle of old cables, the kind with those big chunky connectors that do not fit anything made after 1995. A yellowed keyboard with those tall, clicky keys that sounded like machine guns when you typed. 3 floppy disks with faded labels I could not read. Some random USB drives that probably held corrupted files from decades ago. And one old leather-bound notebook, the kind with pages that had gone slightly brown at the edges. Chad stood up, walked over, and patted my shoulder in this way that made my skin crawl. He said something about how I should be careful not to sell all my newfound wealth in one place. Then he made some crack about teachers getting paid well these days, with a smile that made it clear he knew exactly how little I actually made. His voice had that tone people use when they're being mean, but want to pretend they are joking. I have heard it my whole life. I did not say anything. What could I say? That this was unfair? That Dad would not have done this? Except apparently he did. I just took the box. It was heavier than I expected, which made no sense because it was full of literal garbage. Old tech trash and a notebook. That was my inheritance from a man who spent 40 years building a career in one of the most valuable industries in human history. I did not feel sad in that moment. Sadness would have been cleaner, easier to process. This was something else entirely. It was humiliation so cold and sharp it felt like swallowing ice. They did not just take my inheritance. That would have been simple greed, something I could understand. No, they took something worse. They took Dad's memory and reduced it to nothing. They turned his entire life into a box of obsolete junk that belonged in a dumpster. Mom was already discussing dinner plans with Chad as I stood there holding my cardboard box of disappointment. She mentioned some expensive restaurant downtown, the kind with a month-long waiting list and entrees that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Chad suggested they celebrate, then caught himself and said something about toasting Dad's memory properly. Neither of them looked at me. I had already ceased to exist in their world. I was the weird son who chose books over money, who picked a career that helped kids instead of one that bought boats. I walked out of that office building into the parking lot with my box of cables and lost dreams. The sun was too bright, the kind of aggressive sunshine that feels personally offensive when you are having the worst day of your life. My car, a 2007 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and air conditioning that only worked on Tuesdays, sat in the far corner where I always parked to avoid door dings. I put the box in my trunk next to my emergency teaching supplies and a bag of grading I had been avoiding for 2 weeks. I sat in the driver's seat, but did not start the car. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, feeling something I had never quite felt before. It was like standing in an empty room and realizing nobody actually cared if you were there or not. My whole life, I thought family meant something. I thought blood mattered. I thought somewhere deep down, beneath all the arguments and the differences, we were still connected. But sitting in that parking lot, holding a steering wheel cracked from too many summers, I realized the truth. To them, I was always just a disappointment. The son who did not make enough money. The brother who was not ruthless enough. The person they could safely forget about. Dad was the only one who ever saw me as something other than a failure for choosing meaning over money. And now he was gone. And apparently he agreed with them. The box in my trunk proved it. He left everything valuable to Chad and gave me trash. Maybe I really was a family joke. Maybe everyone had been right about me all along. I drove home in silence, just the sound of my failing suspension and my own thoughts. I carried the box upstairs into my small apartment, the one that smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. I set it in the corner of my living room. I poured 3 fingers of cheap whiskey, the kind that comes in a plastic bottle, into a glass. I did not bother with ice. The sun went down. The room got dark, but I did not turn on the lights. I just sat there, drinking poison that tasted like regret, and stared at the box. It sat in the shadows like an accusation. My father's final message, his entire life and my entire worth, reduced to a cardboard box of obsolete junk that his family treated like a punchline. I would not open it. Not tonight. Maybe never. The box sat in my apartment for 3 days. I walked past it every morning on my way to work. Every evening when I came home. It sat there in the corner like a tombstone, reminding me that I was the son who got garbage while Chad got millions. I taught my classes on autopilot. The American Revolution. The Civil War. Kids asking questions I answered without thinking. My mind was somewhere else, stuck in that lawyer's office, replaying Chad snoring mom's eye roll on an endless loop. On the 3rd night, I poured myself another glass of cheap whiskey. The bottle was half empty now. I stared at the box. Fine, let's get this over with. I dragged it to my kitchen table and opened it. The smell hit me first, that specific scent of old electronics and dust. I pulled out the tangled cables one by one. VGA cables. Serial port connectors. The kind of stuff you find at garage sales where everything costs a quarter and nobody's buying. I found the floppy disks. 3 of them. Labels faded to the point of being unreadable. I did not even own a floppy drive anymore. Nobody did. These things were museum pieces from an era when downloading a single song took 20 minutes, and the internet made that screaming dial-up noise that sounded like robots dying. Then I pulled out the keyboard. It was one of those old IBM models with the tall, clicky keys. Dad used to say these keyboards were built better than modern cars. He was probably right. The thing weighed about 10 pounds and could probably survive a nuclear war. At the bottom of the box was the leather notebook. I opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed at the edges, covered in Dad's precise handwriting. He wrote in all caps, every letter perfectly formed. Engineers, man, they cannot help themselves. Most of it was technical notes, protocols, IP addresses, stuff about early internet architecture that looked like a different language. But on the last page, there was something different. A simple entry, written with the same careful precision. Site, tchmsngs.com. Login, admin_user. Pass, Marxeter 1983. My breath caught. Tech Musings. I remember that site. Dad's personal blog from the late 90s. He built it himself using some ancient content management system that probably had less computing power than my phone. I remembered sitting next to him as a kid, watching him type posts about the future of computing, about how the internet would change everything. I grabbed my laptop and typed in the URL, half expecting a 404 error or one of those park domain pages covered in ads. The site loaded. It looked exactly like I remembered. Black background, neon green text that hurt your eyes, animated GIF construction signs, a hit counter at the bottom showing 847 visitors, frozen in time. It was like opening a time capsule from an era when we thought dancing baby gifts were the height of internet culture. I logged in using credentials from a notebook. The admin panel loaded. It was bare bones, basic HTML forms that looked like they were coded in 1997, because they probably were. I clicked through the sections. Posts. Most of them were about cloud computing, before cloud computing was even a term, about the beauty of clean code, about how technology was not about replacing humanity, but extending it. One post stopped me cold. He wrote, "People fear technology because they think it dehumanizes. But they are wrong. Technology is just memory. It is a bottle with a message that you throw into the ocean of time, hoping someone in the future will find it and understand what you were trying to say." I sat there staring at those words, and something broke inside me. This was Dad, not the formal, distant father who worked 16-hour days, not the man who apparently agreed I deserved nothing. This was the person who understood that teaching history to teenagers was its own kind of message in a bottle. Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away and kept clicking. The comments section was empty. Settings was just basic configuration stuff. Most of the admin panel was exactly what you would expect from a dead blog nobody had touched in 20 years. Then I saw it. A tab labeled inventory. That made no sense. Why would a personal blog have an inventory system? I clicked it. The page was blank except for a single line of text in the default Times New Roman font. Apple Banana River Mountain Patience, Whisper Shadow Rocket Museum, Census Ticket Logic Vault, Ancient Morning Paper Science, Total Travel Kitchen, Debate Possible Solution, Master Network. Just random words. 24 of them. No explanation. No context. My first thought was that Dad had been testing something, maybe a password generator or a random word script. But that did not fit. Dad did not leave garbage lying around in his admin panels. Everything he did was intentional, precise. I copied the text and pasted it into Google. The first result made my heart stop. Seed phrase, cryptocurrency wallet. My hand started shaking. I clicked through to a Bitcoin forum. People discussing how to secure their seed phrases, how these 12 or 24 word combinations were the keys to crypto wallets, how losing your seed phrase meant losing everything. I sat back in my chair, staring at my laptop screen. No way Dad was into crypto. He was an old-school IT guy who thought the stock market was risky enough. He drove a 15-year-old Camry. He bought generic brand cereal. He was not the kind of person who invested in internet magic money. But that string of words was sitting there in his admin panel. And Dad did not make mistakes. I downloaded a Bitcoin wallet. My fingers fumbled on the keyboard as I installed it. The interface loaded, asking for a seed phrase to restore an existing wallet. I typed in the words, all 24 of them. I hit enter. The screen loaded for what felt like an hour, but was probably 3 seconds. Then numbers appeared. Balance, 900 BTC. I stared at the screen. 900 Bitcoin. I refreshed the page. The number did not change. I closed the wallet and opened it again. Still there. My brain was not working right. I opened a calculator. Opened a new browser tab. Typed Bitcoin price into Google. Current price, $99,847 per Bitcoin. I did the math 3 times because my hands were shaking too much to trust myself. 900 times 99,847. $89,862,300. Almost $90 million. I stood up from my chair, so fast it fell over backward. I paced my tiny kitchen. I sat back down. I stood up again. I checked the wallet. Still there. Real. Actually real. My father, the man who drove a used Camry and complained about the price of coffee, had been sitting on $90 million. And he hid the key to it in a dead blog that looked like it was designed by a drunk person in 1998. The box they mocked. The garbage Chad sneered at. The obsolete junk Mom dismissed. It was the key to a fortune. But why? Why hide it? Why not tell anyone? Why leave it to me like this? I went back to the admin panel. clicking through every section again with new eyes. What else did you hide, Dad? I found another tab I had missed before. Drafts. One draft post. Title, Insurance. It was password protected. I tried my birthday. Wrong password. I tried his birthday. Wrong. I tried the date Mom and Dad got married. Wrong. Then it hit me. What was the most ironic password Dad could possibly use? What would make him smile, that quiet smile he got when he thought something was funny, but would not explain the joke? I typed Mom's maiden name. Morrison. The post unlocked. It was not a blog post. It was a journal. A digital diary covering the last year of his life. I started reading. And with every paragraph, the temperature of my apartment seemed to drop. March 15th. Chad came by the office today. Said he needed to discuss the quarterly reports. Except we do not do quarterly reports. We are an IT consulting firm, not a public company. He was nervous. I checked the books after he left. $300,000 missing from the operating account. Transferred to something called CM Holdings. His initials, May 2nd. Janet called me this morning, not to ask how I was doing, to complain about Mark, about how his teacher salary is somehow an embarrassment to family, about how we should push him to do something more lucrative. She said his modest needs are dragging the family down. I asked her what she meant by that. She hung up. June 18th. Chad has taken over $2 million now. Small transfers. 50,000 here. 100,000 there. He is smart about it. Spreading it out. He thinks I do not notice because I am old. Because I spend my time writing code instead of attending his networking events. He forgets I built the systems he is stealing from. August 3rd. Janet suggested I update my will. She brought it up 3 times at dinner. Very casual. Very concerned. So I should make sure everything is properly organized for when I am gone. She is 62 years old and talking about my death like she is planning a vacation. September 29th. They came today. Together. With a new lawyer I had never met. Young guy. Expensive suit. Chad did the talking while Janet nodded along. They said I should revise my will. Said Mark is not responsible enough to handle an inheritance. That he would waste it on books and nonprofit work. That Chad understands wealth. Understands how to grow it. I asked what would happen if I said no. The lawyer spoke then. Very calm. Very professional. He mentioned memory issues. Cognitive decline. How at my age these things can happen suddenly. How the court takes these matters very seriously. How nursing homes are evaluated on a tier system, and state-run facilities are always option of last resort. They were threatening me, my own wife, my own son, threatening to have me declared incompetent and locked away in some nightmare warehouse for discarded parents if I did not sign over everything to Chad and leave Mark with nothing. I signed the will. I had no choice. Janet and Chad smiled. The lawyer left. They talked about going to celebrate over dinner. They did not invite me, but they are fools. They think assets are what you can see. Houses, cars, investment portfolios, things with paper trails and legal documents. They forgot where I made my first real money. They forgot I was in IT before IT was even called IT. They forgot about the 900 Bitcoin I bought in 2010 when they cost $6 each and nobody thought they would ever be worth anything. I spent $5,400 on a joke. On internet money that everyone said was worthless. I put the seed phrase somewhere safe. Somewhere Chad would never think to look. Somewhere only someone who actually paid attention to me would find. Tonight, I am updating my blog. The one Mark used to sit next to me and read when he was 8 years old. The one he found interesting when everyone else thought I was wasting my time. I am putting the key in the inventory section. Because if there's one thing I learned in 40 years of coding, it is that the most important things are always hidden in plain sight. If Mark finds this, he will understand. He will know what to do. And maybe, just maybe, he will finally have the resources to make him understand that you cannot measure a person's worth by their bank account. The entry ended there. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at my laptop screen. The words blurred, refocused, blurred again. I was not crying anymore. Something else was happening. Something cold and sharp and crystal clear. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something new. Something that felt like a blade being sharpened. Chad threatened our father. Mom stood by and watched. They extorted a dying man into signing away his will. They treated me like garbage at the funeral. They laughed at my inheritance. They had no idea what they had done. They had no idea what I now had. $90 million was not just money anymore. It was ammunition. It was leverage. It was justice wrapped in code and hidden in plain sight for over a decade. I closed my laptop. The apartment was silent, but in my mind, something was ringing like an alarm bell, clear and sharp and absolutely certain. This was not about revenge. This was about making them understand that you cannot measure worth in dollars, and you cannot threaten good people and walk away clean. Dad left me the box because he knew exactly what was in it. Not garbage. A weapon. The next morning, I went to work. I taught my third period class about the fall of the Roman Empire. I stood in front of 30 teenagers who were half asleep and told them that great empires never collapse from outside forces. They rot from within. Corruption. Arrogance. The belief that power makes you untouchable. I barely kept a smile off my face. I was about to give a private lesson in that exact principle. For the next month, I acted completely normal. Same old Honda Civic, with a dent in the door. Same brown bag lunch I brought from home. Same cheap apartment that smelled like other people's cooking. To anyone watching, I was still marked a history teacher, living his quiet, unremarkable life. But in my free time, I was not grading papers. I was making phone calls. Picture the scene. Me, wearing my only decent tweed jacket with the elbow patches, sitting in a glass conference room on the 47th floor of a building in Manhattan. The kind of building where the elevators have their own elevators. The law firm's name had 5 surnames in it, all of them sounding like they belonged to people who summer in the Hamptons and use summer as a verb. The lawyers looked at me like I was a lost substitute teacher who wandered into the wrong seminar. Young guys in suits that cost more than I made in 6 months. Perfectly styled hair. Watches that could probably be traded for small countries. Then I transferred 1 Bitcoin to their retainer account. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. I told them I needed 2 things. First, complete an anonymous liquidation of cryptocurrency assets through an OTC desk. Quiet. Professional. No flags raised. Second, I needed them to analyze a digital journal and determine the best way to report tax fraud to the IRS. They did not ask questions. When you transfer the equivalent of a luxury car as a down payment, people stop asking questions. Over the next month, $90 million minus taxes and fees flowed into accounts belonging to a new holding company I created. I named it Tech Musings Holdings. It felt right. It felt like Dad was still in the room, nodding approval. The lawyers earned every cent of their ridiculous fees. They moved money like water through channels I did not even know existed. Shell companies in Delaware, trusts in Nevada, everything legal, everything documented, everything completely untraceable to a history teacher from a cheap apartment who drove a car with a broken AC. Then we moved on to phase 2. Chad, my brother, had built his entire life on leverage. Borrowed money, borrowed credibility, borrowed from Dad's business for years, skimming just enough that he thought nobody would notice. He was a house of cards pretending to be a skyscraper. I did not need to destroy him. I just needed to remove 1 card and let gravity do the rest. The lawyers prepared an anonymous whistleblower package for the IRS. Not just Dad's journal. Dad had kept digital copies of everything. Bank statements showing every transfer Chad made. Dates, amounts, account numbers. A complete paper trail of $2 million in theft spread over 5 years. The package was perfect, detailed, documented, impossible to ignore. The lawyers told me I could claim a whistleblower reward, potentially millions of dollars. I told them I did not want a cent. They looked at me like I was insane. Then they smiled. They said refusing the reward would make the tip 3 times more credible. The IRS would know this was not about money. This was about justice. I hit submit on the whistleblower portal. Then I went back to teaching the American Revolution. 2 months passed. I taught my classes. I graded papers. I ate lunch in the teacher's lounge and complained about the coffee with everyone else. Normal, invisible, forgotten. Then the first shot landed. I did not learn about it from the news. I learned about it from a panic phone call from Mom. Her voice was shrill, hysterical, cracking in ways I had never heard before. The IRS had frozen all of Chad's accounts. They raided his office, seized his computers, interviewed his business partners. She kept saying it was a mistake, some terrible mistake. I made sympathetic noises. Oh no, that's awful. I'm sure he'll get it sorted out. But he did not get it sorted out. See, Chad had built his entire financial empire on credit. He took out loans against Dad's house, against the investment portfolio, against future earnings from a consulting business that was mostly just him charging people to attend seminars where he talked about synergy and disruption. When the IRS froze his accounts, the banks got nervous. When the banks got nervous, they called in their loans. When Chad could not pay, they called in more loans. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one bigger than the last. Within 6 weeks, Chad was bankrupt. The house, the cars, the investment portfolio, all of it was seized to pay creditors. The $5 million estate that Mom and Chad thought they had stolen fair and square was now owned by a consortium of very angry banks. Then I got the notification. The estate was going to auction, bank foreclosure sale. Minimum bid set at whatever amount would cover the outstanding debt. The auction was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. I took a personal day from school. I drove to the courthouse in my dented Honda. I wore my tweed jacket. I looked like exactly what I was, a teacher who probably could not afford a bid on a storage unit, let alone a $5 million property. The auction room was mostly empty. A few real estate investors with their laptops and their calculators. A lawyer representing the bank. And in the back corner, looking like they had aged 10 years and 2 months, were Mom and Chad. Chad wore a suit that used to be expensive but now just looked desperate. Mom clutched her purse like it contained the last dollars they owned, which it probably did. They stared at the front of the room like they were hoping for a miracle, some last-minute buyer who would overpay enough that they might see some money after the bank took its cut. I sat in the back row. They did not see me. The auctioneer started his speech. Property description, outstanding debt, minimum bid, the usual legal language that nobody listens to. Then he opened the bidding. The room was silent. The real estate investors had done their homework. They knew this property was underwater, worth maybe $3 million in the current market, but carrying $4 million in debt. Nobody wanted to touch it. I raised my paddle. The auctioneer looked surprised. He called out my bidder number, asked for my bid amount. I bid exactly enough to cover the bank's debt, not a penny more. It was roughly 30 cents on the dollar, compared what the house was worth 2 years ago. The auctioneer asked if anyone wanted to counter. Silence. He asked again. Going once. Going twice. The gavel fell. Sold to bidder 847, representing MT Holdings. I stood up to leave. That was when Mom saw me. Her eyes went wide. She looked from me to the auctioneer and back to me. I watched her brain try and make the connection, try and understand why her failure son was at a foreclosure auction for a house he could never afford. I walked past her without a word. 2 weeks later, after all the paperwork cleared and the deed transferred, I did exactly one thing to the house. I changed the locks. Then I sent a text message. I sent it to both Mom and Chad, who were now living in a rental apartment in a neighborhood where the grocery store had bars on the windows. The text said, I heard you lost a house. The new owner wants to discuss some items with you. Please come to the old address tomorrow at 10 a.m. He might let you collect your personal belongings. I did not sign it. I sent it from a burner phone number. They showed up exactly at 10. I watched them through the window as they pulled up in a beat-up sedan that must have been a rental. Chad looked angry. The kind of angry that comes from humiliation. The kind that makes men do stupid things. Mom looked hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left just a shell. I opened the door. I will never forget the expression on their faces. It started as confusion, then recognition, then a slow spreading horror as their brains finally connected the dots. Mom whispered my name like it was a question, like she was not sure I was real. Chad found his voice first. His face went from pale to red in about 2 seconds flat. He started yelling about how I ruined them, how I somehow got money I could not possibly have, how I was a failure who taught kids about dead people for poverty wages. He used some other words, too, the kind that would get me fired if I said them in my classroom. I did not say anything. I just stepped back and gestured for them to come inside. They walked into the living room like they were walking into a trap, which, to be fair, they were. I had set up Dad's old laptop, connected to the massive TV that used to belong to Chad. 80 inches of crystal clear 4K display. On the screen was the Tech Musings website. Black background, green text. Those ridiculous animated GIF construction signs that looked like they were designed by someone who thought the internet was a passing fad. Chad was confused. Mom looked lost. They had no idea what they were looking at. I picked up the remote. I said that Dad left Chad this state, left Mom her lifestyle, and left me the contents of his desk. I logged into the admin panel, right there on the big screen, username and password typed slowly, so they could see every letter. The interface loaded with its ancient HTML forms and basic text. I told them they saw junk. I saw what Dad actually left. I navigated to the inventory section. The string of words appeared on the screen. Apple Banana River Mountain Patience, Whisper Shadow Rocket Museum, Census Ticket Logic Vault, Ancient Morning, Paper Science, Total Travel Kitchen, Debate Possible Solution, Master Network. Chad stared at the screen. I watched his brain work. He knew about cryptocurrency. He had probably dismissed it as nerd money and tulip bulbs for tech idiots. But his financial brain was making connections. Random words. 24 of them. Seed phrase. His face went white. I told him the money was not the interesting part. I went back to the main admin panel. I opened the draft section, clicked on the post titled insurance. The password prompt appeared. I typed Mom's maiden name. Morrison. Her eyes went wide when she saw me type it. She knew. She knew exactly what that password meant. The journal opened. I turned on the computer's text-to-speech function. I selected the voice Dad used to use for client presentations, back when he had laryngitis 1 year, and could not talk. A synthesized voice, but one they would both recognize. I hit play. The voice filled the room. It read Dad's journal entries in that calm, mechanical tone. Every entry, every stolen amount, every cruel comment about me, every threat they made, the lawyer visit, the nursing home threats, everything. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. She started sliding down the wall, like her legs forgot how to work. Chad just stood there, frozen, watching his entire life play out on a screen in his father's synthesized voice. I let it play until the part where Dad wrote about them celebrating. About how they went to dinner after extorting him. About how they did not even invite him. I stopped the recording. I stood up and looked at both of them. Mom crumpled against the wall. Chad, looking like someone had hit him with a brick. I told them Dad left each of us exactly what we valued. Chad got his crimes. Mom got her favorite son. And me, I got the truth. Turned out the truth was worth $90 million. I walked to the door and opened it. I told them to get out of my house. They left without a word. No arguments. No more yelling. They just walked out like ghosts, pale and silent and completely defeated. I closed the door behind them. I stood in the entryway of my childhood home, the house where I learned to read, where Dad taught me about ancient Rome in his office, where I always felt like I did not quite belong because I care about the wrong things. Dad's old notebook was sitting on the hall table. The same leather-bound notebook with his precise handwriting and his careful notes about protocols and passwords. They thought inheritance was about what you could see. Bank accounts, houses, stock portfolios, things with price tags and legal documents. But the real inheritance was knowing where to look. Dad did not leave me money. He left me a lesson. He showed me that the people who seem to have all the power are often just bullies with good credit. That quiet people are not weak people. That teaching kids about history matters just as much as making money, maybe more. He left me proof that you cannot measure a person's worth by their bank account or their job title or how impressive they look at networking events. And he left me the resources to make sure Mom and Chad finally understood that. I picked up the notebook and walked into Dad's old office. It looked exactly the same as it did when I was 8 years old, sitting next to him while he typed blog posts that nobody but me ever read. I sat down at his desk. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful instead of empty. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Justice was not about revenge. It was about making sure the truth finally came to light. And the truth was that the obsolete junk in a cardboard box was worth more than any mansion, any investment portfolio, any luxury car. Because it was not about the money. It never was. It was about a father who knew his son well enough to leave him exactly what he needed, hidden in exactly the right place, waiting for exactly the right moment. I opened a notebook to a random page. Dad's handwriting stared back at me, all caps, perfectly formed, every letter precise. At the bottom of the page, he had written something I had not noticed before. It said, "The most valuable things are always hidden in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. And you just have to be patient enough to wait for the right moment to act." Love, Dad. I sat there in his office, in the house that was now mine, holding the notebook that changed everything. Outside, the sun was setting. The light came through the window at an angle, hitting the old keyboard with the clicky keys, casting shadows on the wall. I smiled. Dad had taught me one last lesson, and I had been the only one paying attention.